Right, so I've been getting a lot of stick in the comments about pronunciation, so what I thought is I'd knock them all out of the way just in case, and you can get it out of your system in the comments. So let's go through it. Router, potato, Mediterranean, yogurt, basil, vase, vitamin, garage, aluminium. Are we good? We knocked it all out? I'll see you in the video. Hello and welcome back, and today we are looking at a brand new QNAP, but I'm going to keep saying the word brand new when I talk about this device. New isn't quite right. If I'm going to talk about this device, I think it's worth highlighting that this device is kind of a rejig of a system that originally came out in 2018. There's no secret about this. This NAS here, the TVS-872X, is their new 8-bay 10GBE equipped model. However, the majority of the hardware you see in it, with a few exceptions that we'll touch on in the video, are similar to a device that came out at the start of 2018, the TVS-872XT, and that was a 10GBE and Thunderbolt system. So before we go any further, although I am going to use the word new probably a few times in this system during this video, I have to highlight that this is very similar to that system, and if you do own that a previous generation system, the 872 XT or any of the XT series, you can stop watching now, to be perfectly honest, because you're all right. This is that system sans Thunderbolt, because a number of people liked that system, liked the beefiness and the hardware and the performance it was bringing to the party. Indeed, the 8-bay was in a lot of my top lists a few years ago, but they were kind of, I don't need Thunderbolt, I don't even have Thunderbolt, I ain't got no Mac Mini knocking around and I get you. So that is for you. And there's the intro for you. This device knocks around for about 1,700 quid, including the tax in your local area. So wherever you are in the world, the price will differ ever so slightly. Now again, we are going to compare it against the XT a number of times in this video, and the first thing we have to talk about is that price tag. The XT, the Thunderbolt version of this device, which has got some differences in the internal hardware that we'll talk about, it's about £2,000. It's a little bit more, maybe 2,050 quid, including the tax. So it's about 300 quid difference shopping around. And in the end of this video, we are going to touch on that. Is this system and its 300 quid price difference against the XT, which is still very popular in 2021, worth your time and obviously worth your data? So what have we got? We've got this unit. It's an 8-bay device. It supports SATA hard drive storage, and there's a couple of SSD bays inside that we'll talk about later on. It's got great PCIe upgradability. It's got a number of ports, features and functionality that in 2018 were insanely future-proof. And even now in 2021, there are things about this device that most modern NAS releases in the last 12 months still don't feature. So again, despite this device's age, it has to be said that it still stands up remarkably well against the likes of the Synology DS1821 Plus, the likes of the TS877 and other devices too. Now, one of the biggest reasons for that is the CPU inside. QNAP are one of the last brands to still utilise Intel Core. Intel Pentiums, of course, but also Intel i3, i5 and i7 in a number of their devices. The utilisation of Intel Core and its enormous amount of graphical support and just the general performance threshold of Intel Core CPUs has never really been questioned. And even though the market is moving towards the utilisation of Xeon in a bigger way, with 4 cores, 6 cores, 8 cores, Xeon, Silver and more, the Intel Core series versus Xeon is still very appealing, and anyone from a classic PC build background is still going to be quite tempted by it. Before we go any further, let's unbox it. So there's our external box there, fairly standard stuff again, big old brown box, information there about the hardware specifications and the unit. Let's get it out of here. Let's get that done. Sorry. That you're now just going to watch a man open a box. I'll be honest, it's just as interesting as it looks. Fast forward a couple of minutes if you like. We've got the UK mains lead. It's a single PSU device. It's not one of those desktop devices that's got 2 PSU ports, and that in itself is really rare. Now, the accessories box, this is the first time I'm opening this device, and I will highlight in this hardware review, keyword hardware, we're doing a software overview of this device in another video to break it up. the accessories with its predecessor was one that I always liked because it just gave a couple of little extras that the other devices didn't, and it'll be nice to see if they maintain that here. So we've got information on that quick start installation guide. We've got information on the warranty. The warranty on this device is one of the early areas where I was a little bit, my nose was put out of joint, and that is because it arrives with a 2-year warranty, which for its price tag seems a little tight, particularly given the D series has got a 3-year warranty and a number of their newer releases have 3-year warranty. It seems a bit odd that this device only has 2 years. Whether that's something to do with some of the components from the likes of Intel, I'm not sure, but 2 years seems a bit tight. It can be extended to 5, but that's an additional purchase, so we're not really going to count that. Also inside, we have the bag there that has the screws for 2.5-inch media, 3.5-inch media, and screws there for M2 SSDs. What's really cool is the device arrives with a couple of metal heat sinks for the M2s inside, something very few brands do. The utilization of M2 NVMEs in NAS systems has grown wildly in popularity over the years, but either a brand will include those little thermal rubber pads, which are a bit meh, if I'm honest, or they include nothing at all, and the M2s can get very, very hot. So it's nice that QNAP have gone to the measure of still continuing to include those metal adhesive heatsinks. Also, there's keys for the trays. They can be screw locked, not screw locked, key locked. But what I really like is they still include a Cat 6 cable. And I'm aware the difference between Cat 5 and Cat 6 is barely a few nicker, but that all the more makes it infuriating when you buy 10 GBE equipped NAS, particularly copper of course, and they include Cat 5 and not Cat 6. It's just a few quid extra, and you will see the performance difference, the latency difference certainly. So again, it's nice that they include that. I would have been really annoyed if I've opened this box and QNAP had cut that down. So let's get rid of the accessories and get the unit out of the box. That was a lot harder than it should have been. We've got that enormous amount of hard foam there. For transit, I will appreciate any brand that chucks in a decent amount of foam for transit. Everyone seems to overlook the damage that can be done by shock and motion on these devices in transit, with or without hard drive storage media inside. So it's nice to see that that's still very much the case on this device. QNAP, let's be realistic, have really taken a knock public relations wise recently over that Q-Locker stuff. So right now, it would be very easy for the brand to still want to cut corners. So again, hopefully that never becomes the case, but in this system I'm quite pleased they're at least maintaining a lot of the kind of brand standards with regards to the packaging at the very least. Just get rid of that foam, again, giant foam. And that is the system itself. We'll bring that close to the camera. Sorry about the lights glaring off there. So again, this is a chassis that when the original 872XT came out was still relatively new. But in this case, we have seen this chassis utilised in a number of different generations of device. Obviously, there'll be differences between versions of devices in the QNAP portfolio, but this system still arrives in that same chassis. A little bit of cooling either side. They've improved the cooling vents actually, from what I can see. We've got the base cooling there underneath each of the storage bays. There's ventilation space between each of those drives. If we have a look at the front of the system there, we have a look. We can see at the top, the system still features an LCD panel there. Something, again, QNAP is still one of the few brands left doing that. I know Asus Store have done that in some recent releases. I love an LCD panel on a NAS. It gives me real-time information about the device, about the temperature, about the IPs, about the system and the storage health, and if there are alerts and with beeps, I can find out more information without logging in to a client application. It's a little thing, but it's very useful to have. And again, it's navigatable and actionable there. It's not just a pointless UI that you can't do anything with. We have multiple LEDs there on the side for each of the LAN, the status, and the M2 activity as well. Each of these drive bays has got an LED based into the top along there. If we remove the trays, they are the click and load trays, of course. These click and load trays, not spring loaded, they feel a little plasticky if I'm honest. There are better trays out there. I think the metal ones certainly. I would have liked to have seen metal trays in this, don't get me wrong. Given its metal chassis, it's going to be a noisy device when it's in operation, and ultimately metal trays would not have made that any better. But at the same time, it's not going to be the quietest device in the first place. Therefore, I think it would have been a case of just, going with plastic trays. They can't really use the excuse about noise because it's a bit lock the door after the horse has bolted, isn't it? But the trays themselves, again, click and load, stick a drive inside there, nice and straightforward. And the system utilises SATA hard drive and SSDs with the base of it right there with the screw holes there built in that allow you to install hard drives and SSDs quite easily. Each one of those SATA bays, if we have a look inside, is lovely and clean and well ventilated throughout the whole chassis. And I will add, it supports up to the very latest 18 TB drives. So again, we're talking WD Red, we're talking about UltraStar, we're talking about Seagate Ironwolf, Seagate Exos, that sort of thing. So that's a tremendous amount of storage to be supported with 20 TB drives coming just around the corner. And 8 bay is a great little way to start. And do remember that you don't have to fully populate the device. You can partially populate and add more drives later on if you want. Of course, it is worth highlighting. Again, we will talk about this a little bit more later on. And this is a hardware review, remember. So we're going to sort of touch on the software stuff. But we've got other videos for that and another one coming up for this. You do have the option at setup to choose between ext4 and ZFS as your file system of choice. So again, QTS or QUTS, but do bear in mind that the expanding of storage in ZFS is by no means as easy as it is in ext4, and also you lose access to things like Qtier as well, which is worth bearing in mind. Upgrading the system memory is also pretty straightforward. The side panel inside there, you can see those SODIMM slots there. The system arrives with 8 gig of DDR4 memory by default, and again, if you want to take advantage of the ZFS system, then 8 gig, you can get away with some odd stuff, but inline data deduplication, that's not really on the table there. So do bear in mind that single gig of 2400 megahertz DDR4 non-ECC on this system will need to be upgraded to 16 gig to really take advantage of ZFS. Now, another thing I want to talk about on this device, and I remember distinctly talking in very good terms about this a few years ago when I reviewed the XT back in I think the end of 2017, early 2018. I think I got a pre-release model. This system arrives with USB 3.2 Gen 2 connectivity on the front. It's a one-touch copy button for having a backup locally for your home or business needs. You can back up the USB to the NAS or the NAS to USB periodically with differential backups, full backups, time-managed backups as well, versions type stuff. And even then, that was pretty far ahead of the idea of a NAS having USB 3.2 Gen 2. Fast forward now to not only NASes still arriving in 2021 with bog standard USB 5 gig, but also the whole renaming conventions happened since then to try and really soup up a lot of devices and their brands and their spec sheets saying USB 3.2 Gen 1. Nice try. We know it's still 5 gig. You're not fooling anyone there. Now, if we look at the system, we've got plenty of cooling on the side, and we will be removing the lid later in the video as well. We've got that extra bit of cooling there. I do want to touch on that little cooling fan as well later on, because there's something quite unique to this series of chassis that this system has in conjunction with that Intel Core CPU. Now, in terms of connectivity, this is another area where I think this device, in its XT form, definitely broke the mold and definitely was future-proofed in a way that I wouldn't have thought 3 years down the line in 2021 I could still apply to the X model here. If we look at the ports and connections, we'll get that so the light doesn't go absolutely crazy. We have HDMI here at the top connection there, and that's HDMI 2.0A. The HDMI 2.0A connection there means 4K at 60 frames per second. We've also got the 10GBE connection we've already discussed, 1000 megabytes per second there. Yum, yum. And with 8 bays of storage, maxing that out is going to be real easy. There's even the argument, I would say, that one port isn't really enough for this 8 bay because it has the potential to exceed 1000, maybe not break 2000 without the right storage or caching, but still, breaking 1000 on an 8 bay is very, very easy. And although it's nice to have these two 1GBE ports here, I will say, other than maybe just a bog standard LAN for low-level network stuff, I kind of wish this device was a 2x10G box, because I think the hardware inside and the storage potential across the 8 bays and the M2 NVMEs could have done so much more with that. On top of that, we've got those USB ports, and again, there are 4 10 gigabit USB port on this device, as well as one standard 5 gig there. I'm assuming they just had some chipset lanes left over to play with. But with regards to those ports, they don't just support external storage. This is a KVM supported device, so many accessories, keyboard, video, mouse, with an HD output with HD station. On top of that, there is of course adapters like the QNAP 5GB adapter that allows you to add considerably more connections. I think the 5G adapter is still about 50-60 nicker, I think, but that money allows you to add another 5 gig connection to this device. Nice, but I kind of wished maybe these could have been 2.5G like a lot of their more modern releases, or a net 1 5G port, who knows. And again, maybe that would have taxed the lanes too much, but I do think it's a real shame that this has only got the single 10G port. And I think, given this isn't really a giant leap from the XT series, I think that's one area where they maybe put their feet up a little bit on the hardware stakes. The PSU inside is a 250 watt PSU. Power consumption, active versus passive, is still pretty close, to be perfectly honest. Late 60s in the watts with regards to when it's active, and early 40s when it's in idle. So it's still quite a hungry beast as an idle device, and a lot of that is to do with the active cooling inside. Not just these two enormous rear-mounted fans, but also a lot of active cooling on this side that I'm going to show you in a moment when I remove the top of the device. Now, the last thing I'm going to talk about on the rear of this device, before we get the lid off of it and talk a little bit more about QNAP's OS and what it can do and what it can't do, I'm going to talk about these PCIe slots here. Now, one slot is PCIe Gen 3 times 4. Yum yum, 4,000 megabytes per second throughput. Always good to hear. But the other slot is a PCIe Gen 3 times 16. It's a CPU PCIe supported slot. We're talking graphics cards. We're talking all kinds of connectivity available on that slot. And again, this device allows you to do GPU pass-through. It is an embedded graphics card, embedded graphics CPU inside, but still nonetheless, it's great that we've got support of bigger, beefier cards for this device. And with QNAP working now towards not only a new series of 25 GB fiber channel cards, and even 100 gig cards on the horizon, this is when that throughput and that bandwidth is going to be really tested. Not that this device is going to come close to supporting that in terms of media throughput, but it's nice to have a very widespread area of adaptability and upgradability on those PCIEs. Removing the lid like so, and there are 3 screws holding that in place. We remove that big old metal chassis again. This is not going to be a quiet NAS whilst in operation. We can have a little look at what exactly keeps this thing up and running. So here on the inside first, we've got those PCIe slots there at the top. Let's bring that a little closer for you guys. We've got the PCIEs up here. Lovely clear chipset, plenty of airflow throughout that device, which is always good to hear because these devices pretty much live or die by active cooling in conjunction with passive cooling throughout the system. And if these things aren't kept at a decent temperature when they're on for days, weeks and months at a time, not only will your performance degrade noticeably, but also the whole system can suffer and eventually die. So if we look at the other side, we can look at the fun stuff. So on this side, if we bring that down there, we can see here this massive active cooling dual fan array. The CPU lives underneath this giant arrangement here, and ultimately that is kind of what keeps things running beautifully. This CPU has an incredibly aggressive heat sink here on top, and these fans drawing air in and out throughout the whole system allow it to maintain that operational temperature that an Intel core, once it has, will push through phenomenal performance all the way through. On the memory side, the memory is located under here on the inside of that chassis, on the other side even. And inside we've got those 2 Nvme slots just underneath those PCIEs. Now those Nvme slots, it's worth highlighting, that's another area where I think there's been a little pinch of compromise, and perhaps that is because of the chipset inside, but still nonetheless, a number of you will be sad to hear that those Nvme slots are PCIe Gen 3 times 2. So that is a maximum throughput potential of just 2,000 megs each. 2,000 is still a great number, And if you're going to install M2 NVMEs inside, PCIe Gen 3 SSDs like this one, you're going to get some great performance. And you can use those Nvme slots for raw storage, not just caching, but also tiering, or use them for raw storage pools internally, both in ZFS and ext4. But what I will add is, if you're buying those NVMEs, you're buying those for that great performance, and sometimes you're going to be a little let down by the fact that they're going to be throttled individually down to 2000 megs max each. It's still nice that you don't have to utilize a PCIe slot for it, and if you were to go ahead and install QM2 cards internally, then chances are, if you go for one like this one, this is the 10GBE and M2 NVMe upgrade card. There's a newer generation of this card as well that doesn't have the throttling PCIe that this one has, but still nonetheless, the ability to have both 10GBE and NVMe available on this on day one, instead of using a card like this, opens that PCIe to allow you to add more 10GBE ports, to add Wi-Fi 6, to add graphics cards, to add a genuinely large number of performance and accelerator enhancement cards as well. And if you're going to use this for surveillance or AI photo stuff, then you have things like the Coral M2, that Google TPU upgrade that we're going to be looking at here in more detail on the channel soon. That's supported by this. So there's a lot of hardware potential inside to really make the most of this system and get a lot out of it in terms of throughput, depending on what the media it is that you put inside. Removing that giant heatsink there, nice chunky old big heatsink there, because again, moving parts are slightly questionable. A lot of NASs that could be on for a greater length of time. We can have a good look at that CPU inside there. And again, we've never really looked into exchanging CPUs on NAS devices here, because again, that's like a big old warranty killer. But still, nonetheless, it's a great big amount of pooling that also covers not only that of that Intel i3 processor, but also that Quantia 10GBE dedicated controller chip that's separate to the system for handling 10GBE to ensure great performance. Again, is covered by that heatsink with its own dedicated thermal panel right there. The light does not like that, does it? So let's talk a little bit about that hardware inside. We mentioned that CPU, and again, it is an Intel i3. It's the 8100T series i3, 8th generation, and that CPU is a quad-core 3.1 gigahertz processor. It ranks over 5,000 on CPU benchmark. I think it's about 5,300 at the time of recording. That CPU also has the embedded graphics, as mentioned, UHD 630 graphics. So again, 4K 1080p, lovely stuff. And again, you've got that HDMI for 4K 60 frames on the rear there. The 8 gig of DDR4 memory inside this device that arrived by default, that I think a lot of people are going to upgrade early doors, can go up to 64 gig. The 8 gig arrives on a single module, and if you go to 64 gig, that's a couple of 32 gig slots inside there. We will be testing Crucial and a few other brands in this, but of course QNAP have their own on there, but I know a number of you like to go a bit unofficial on the memory. Now, talking about the CPU and the memory, that is one of the first early areas where the comparison between this and the now 3 years old release of the TVS-872X needs to be addressed. Now remember, there was about 300 odd quid difference between them. Now this system arrives with that i3 quad core, and it arrives with 8 gig of memory. The 872XT arrived with an i5 6 core, same frequency, but also arrived with 16 gig of memory. So twice the memory and another CPU of a higher gen, and not so much higher gen, but an i5 over an i3, and 6 cores over 3. Now, that price difference of 300 Nika, they made up a big part of that. Now, this has ZFS available to it, but from what I understand, you can now get QUTS Hero, the ZFS file system, for your existing XT model NASs. You will need to format them, so back up, but you have it available to you. So that 300 Nika so far seems to be made up by the CPU, the 300 saving, the memory, and then the lack of Thunderbolt. Both systems have 10 GBE. This one just doesn't have Thunderbolt there. So now 300 Nika doesn't seem as big a difference, and it starts to make me think that this device is more expensive than I think it should be. Now maybe we're looking at a launch price, that 1,700 quid or so price tag. But even if that price changes, I think this device is still too close to the £2,000 including tax price tag of the 872XT. Now, they both have the same PCIe upgradability, they've both got the same kind of memory and stuff like that, and they've still got the same network interface ports and support of third-party network interface ports on the rear. They've both got that 2 years warranty as well, which again, not a fan of that 2 years warranty. I like this system, I really do. I like this system in the same way I liked the 872XT and I liked the 872N. My big problem with it is that they seem to have either released this device too expensive or the Thunderbolt NAS at 3 years of age is now too cheap, and therefore if you're going to go for this, you might as well cut off a terabyte of every one of those drives, scale them down and get yourself the more souped up model. In terms of software, this device has got a lot going for it. And again, software and support and network and internet connectivity is something that QNAP recently has really taken a kicking for in their handling of QLocker. We gotta talk about it. We talked about it on the channel. We've got the third part in our series, hopefully wrapping the whole thing up for the most part here on the channel at least for the foreseeables. But the software on QNAP in a network-only environment is still fantastic in my opinion. I think their hosting of virtual machines in Virtualization Station, really good. It's still the best VM tool out there. Their hybrid backup sync tool, that is one area of contention where I've always believed hybrid backup sync 3 is the most capable tool, even though its involvement in QLocker has certainly taken a bit of a pounding with regards to external connectivity. But again, that is a bigger, broader subject here than just this unit can address. Its use of QVR Pro, their surveillance software, although nowhere near as incredibly user-friendly as the Synology alternative, it is still a much better surveillance tool overall, with wider and more accessible support of AI-assisted recording like QVR Face that this device can support. And with Synology, they need to have a GPU card-assisted NAS. This can do it with that CPU. On top of that QVR stuff, it can be more tailored. It arrives with 8 camera licenses, which is 6 more than most other brands. Again, I know QNAP's stance on camera licenses looks like it's going to change in the near future, which again, that's a subject for another video. So in conclusion, I think I can say I do like this NAS, but I've got to say I like it with a slight sense of resentment, be it because it feels like it's too close in cost to another device, be it that there's still a bit of a bitter taste in a lot of our mouths over QLocker, or the fact that this system feels like it can be so much more if you have to put a little bit more money into it, which I think a number of you are going to be less keen on. If you're looking at this device and it's had a price drop in the last few months, that's a very different story. I would definitely say the device is worth snapping up at that point because it's still one of the very few Intel Core NAS devices out there. My pros on this device, obviously, an i3 in 2021 being a lot rarer, and it's still a damn fine CPU to boot. On top of that, ZFS. There's not enough ZFS NASs out there, and the benefits to you in terms of inline data compression, inline data deduplication, faster RAID builds, faster RAID resilvering, resyncs, the works. That cannot be overestimated. You do lose out on a few features and functionality of QTS in that with regards to Q-tier, or a slightly different way of handling the surveillance with a much faster responsive surveillance platform, but something about those camera licenses that I'm slightly less keen on. Then you've got things like the Nvme Storage port, which is just lovely to see, still continuing, albeit 3x2. You've got that great PCIe upgrade slot there to bring PCIe 3x16 available to you for some real high-end cards. And remember, you can assign known to VMs as well. On top of that, you've got the USB ports on it, which support faster and even more external devices. And of course, at still under 2K, at 1700 Nika, this is still very much in the top 3 for me in terms of 8 bays, in terms of performance for you guys, because most 8-bay devices, when you see them, you are accepting that it's going to cost you maybe 1,500 off the bat without the media. And at 1,700, this still, in 2021, 3 years down the line from the release of the XT, brings so much to things in a way that most modern 8-bays right now are still not getting right, in my opinion. Is this device perfect? Of course not. First and foremost, the price of being currently 300 odd nicker close to the XT. It's going to take a while for a number of us to get over that if we know about it. And if you are in that verge where you're looking at the XT and going, ooh, 300 quid, it's not a huge difference to get a lot more, spend the 300 extra because you will not regret it. But it's not all perfect. There are things about this device that I think could be done better. First and foremost, the price distinction between that and the XT is just a bitter pill for some of us to swallow, where if you're already budgeting with all the hard drive media, 2-3 grand, it makes a lot more sense to scale down on those drives and get the XT model, which is still fantastic right now, even in 2021. On top of that, that 2 years warranty, I'm not a big fan of that. I think 2 years, maybe a little bit more. I know these devices are 24/7. I know it's a lot for these systems to go through, and I know this has a lot more heat-intensive hardware options to it, but 2 years, come on, it's a little tight. Sling on 3 years, for God's sake. 8 gigabyte and not 16 gigabyte annoys me because one, the XT had 16, and yes, it costs more, but not that much more. But secondly, 8 gig removes or at least limits you from accessing a number of the core ZFS features to you. And of course, overall, the only negative I'm going to keep coming back to for this device in terms of hardware is how it compares against the XT, a device that's 3 years old. Yes, that device was way ahead of its time, and this device still maintains a very high standard. But I wish I'd seen the same level of future-proofing in this device now as I saw in that one. Overall, I never give scores. I'd probably give this 7.5, 8 out of 10, and I'm never going to do scoring like that at all. Do stick around in the next videos, in the next few days, where we're going to look at this on software. We're going to be doing lots of performance testing over 10 GBE on the individual storage media with those storage portals. We want to know what is the throughput that we're going to get. Different storage media in this, not just externally with the 10G, but of course with the NVMe's inside, and understand just how good this system's going to be for surveillance, for VMs, and general 10 gigabit Ethernet performance. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, chuck me a like. And if you want to stay tuned for those follow-up videos or more on NAS, do subscribe. If you're still unsure about the network attached storage solution for you, go into the description and find the link to NAS Compares, the free advice section. It's manned by me and Ed. It doesn't cost you anything. We're not really doing it for profit, to be honest. It just sort of keeps the service running. There might be the odd affiliate link, or you can chuck us a donation if you like, in coffee or something. But otherwise, we will answer your email. It might take us an extra day or so because there's only 2 of us, but we answer all the emails. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.